Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Nathan and today we are going to be talking about how Spirit Guardians and a lot of other similar spells have been changed under the 2024 rules, which, as many of you know, are coming out officially this week. Now, last weekend I was at a convention, Rose City Comic Con in Portland, and I happened to get my hands on a copy of the book, so I have been reading through and enjoying all of the new things and thinking about everything that there is to offer. But Spirit Guardians is one of my favorite spells, and I want to talk about how it and sort of other spells have changed in the new edition because it is important, and I figured out a few interesting tricks that you can do with it. Now, I'm not the first person to come up with these kind of ideas, but these are things I came up with independently, and I think a lot of people will come to similar conclusions. So let's get right into it. Here is our agenda for this video. So first I want to talk about what has changed with the spells. Then I'm going to talk about the tactics for using Spirit Guardians or similar spells, both in the old current 2014 edition and the new 2024 version of the rules. And then I'll kind of talk about some conclusions about how things have changed. So, first of all, what specifically has changed about Spirit Guardians and similar spells? Namely, the timing of when damage happens. Now, under the old rules, a creature would have to make a saving throw when it entered the area for the first time on a turn, or when they started their turn in the area. Now, under the new rules, so the area of the spell is now called an emanation. There's a lot of other similar things that are called emanations, but an emanation is an area that is centered on the caster and moves with them. So a lot of similar things have been changed to be called that. Now there are other area of effect damage over time spells that will follow these similar damage trigger changes. So the way that Spirit Guardians triggers damage now. When a creature enters the emanation, this is the same as the enter the area for the first time on a turn, but now it also triggers a saving throw when the emanation enters a creature's space. And this is something that didn't happen under the current rules. If you ran around with your Spirit Guardians, that wasn't the creature entering the area, that was the area entering their space, and so that didn't happen. In Baldur's Gate 3, this is actually the way that spell works, so you can run around and tag everybody. And under the 2024 rules, because they've added this line to Spirit Guardians and pretty much all of the area of effect spells, this is pretty much how all of the area of effect damage over time spells work now. So you can run around, and if you bring the area on top of a creature, they will take damage. Additionally, the start of the turn trigger is gone. There is now a trigger if a creature ends their turn in the area or the emanation. And importantly, a creature can only be forced to make the saving throw once per turn. Now, in theory, it was possible to force a creature to make multiple saves per turn under the 2014 rules. If you had an action readied, and let's say your target started their turn inside your Spirit Guardian, so they took the damage, then they tried to walk out, and you had a readied action to, say, cast Thorn Whip on them, which actually wouldn't work because that would break your concentration on the spell. But if you had something else, like potentially you had an ally who had readied an action to shove them back in, if they moved out, then that would cause them to enter the area for an additional time on a turn, and thus would trigger the damage a second time. So under the 2024 rules, a creature can only take damage from Spirit Guardians or other similar spells like Moonbeam once per turn. However, that's more than once per round, and it can happen on multiple creatures' turns. So let's dive quickly into tactics. So under the 2014 rules, the basic tactics of how to use a spell like Spirit Guardians, you would cast the spell and then you would position so as many enemies as possible start their turn in the area. And this is one of the things that kind of sucked about these spells in 2014, spells like Spirit Guardians, Moonbeam, etc., is that when you cast the spell and it makes the hazardous area, no damage is dealt and you have to wait until the creature starts their turn. Now, the more advanced tactics were to cast the spell and then use force movement to force the target to enter the area on your turn. Then you end your turn, they start their turn in the area, and they take the damage again. A lot of these common force movement included things like Eldritch Blast with Grasp of Hadar for a pull with Spirit Guardians. You could use Telekinetic, you could use Thorn Whip, and if you had other similar spells, you could use Repelling Blast or Telekinetic for a push and that kind of a thing. And you could also, say, push someone into someone else's hazard spell like Spirit Guardians, and that tactic will still work, by the way. But now, as for the 2024 version under these new trigger rules, the basic tactic is to cast the spell and you use your movement on your turn and you run around and you tag the area on as many enemies as you can using the emanation enters the enemy's space trigger. And you can potentially damage a lot more enemies with this based on how fast your character is. Now, as for advanced tactics under the 2024 rules, this is something I've figured out. I think other people will probably come to the same conclusion independently. But what you do now, if you want to maximize damage, on your first turn, just cast the spell and run around like normal. But then in round 2 and beyond, you're still going to run around and tag everyone. You're going to want to make sure that you end your turn out with all the enemies outside the area. And then for your action in round 2, you're going to use the ready action to react to something on someone else's turn and move again. Now, specifically, the ready action hasn't changed. Here's the specific text on it that we need. So first, we decide what perceivable circumstance will trigger our reaction. Then we choose to take the action. Then we choose the action that we will take in response to that trigger, or instead of picking an action, we can choose to move up to our speed in response to it. So for this particular tactic with Spirit Guardians and other similar spells, we're going to choose to move our speed, and so therefore we can run around on our turn and trigger the damage. We can run around on someone else's turn. Because it's a different turn, we can force another save, and therefore they will take the damage again. And again, make sure to end that movement with no enemies in the area, and why will become readily apparent. So what you can do with this is you can potentially get 2 triggers guaranteed per round by yourself, and potentially a 3rd trigger. Now, this 3rd trigger is at the discretion of the enemies, and this is something that they've done by removing the start of the turn trigger. There is that enter or end their turn in the area clause to take damage, and these are things that the enemy will have at their discretion. If they start their turn outside the area, they can choose to come in, and that's a potential 3rd trigger. If you ended with them in the area on that second movement, if they choose to approach and attack you, that is at their discretion if they want to stay in the area and pursue you. So this is actually a lot more reliable and more damage than you could do under the 2014 rules, and let's conclude and talk about why. So, in conclusion, I think the way that these spells work now is much more intuitive, and one of the things I really like is they have immediate impact on the turn that they are cast. So when you cast it and the emanation pops into existence, all the enemies in that area, the emanation just entered their space and they roll to take damage. So it does damage immediately, which is great. And you can also do the whole run around blender tactic. Another thing is that you can potentially do even more damage to even more targets than you could with the 2014 version of these spells. But if you want to do the most damage and get those 2 guaranteed triggers per round, it will cost your reaction. So there is actually a trade-off. This means that if you are a character that has access to, say, the shield spell or absorb elements or counter spell, you won't be able to use these reactions because you're using a reaction to move to do more damage. Likewise, if you have some other like class ability that uses your reaction, you're not going to be able to do it if you used your reaction to move for damage. I think this trade-off of potential survivability or utility for damage is a fair and valid trade, and so I don't have an issue with this, and the damage of these spells, in my opinion, has never been too extreme. Another thing that I like about this is it rewards high mobility, such as movement and teleports, etc., and it really creates a new play style for the way that you want to use spells like Spirit Guardians. You basically want to create a character where spacing is really important. You want to be close enough to the enemies where you don't have to use much movement to tag everybody, but you also want to be far enough away that it makes it difficult to approach you, and it incentivizes doing things like avoiding attacks of opportunity, especially if you're going to be running around a lot. Finally, you can still use the enters the area trigger through teamwork with force movement. This is something I touched on briefly earlier, but they didn't remove the enter the area for the first time on a turn kind of trigger. So if you have someone grappled, you can still drag them into the area of the Spirit Guardians if they were outside and make them take the damage. And I like that they kept this teamwork aspect to pretty much all of these spells. So another thing here is that force movement methods on your own turn that we used to trigger the spell before, particularly telekinetic, but also things like repelling blasts or grasp of Hadar or thorn whip and that kind of thing. A lot of those are much less valuable because you can just trigger the damage by moving the area onto them with your movement, which doesn't take any actions. Thanks for watching. This has been a quick little update on how Spirit Guardians and a lot of the new emanation type spells work under the 2024 rules. Now that I have the book and we are just on the release date, expect to see many more videos in the near future. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.